the focus of today's chat in the little section in the books was biodiversity. And those of you who've done training with us would more of a refresher, but often when people talk about biodiversity, we focus on species diversity. And often we go to the extreme of focusing on rare and endangered species. So I think there were two mentions of koalas in our wiffle today. That's where it goes. And just understanding we'll never save koalas unless we save the whole environment. So we need more than just species diversity when we're talking about biodiversity. And so the other components that I just, again, get you to think about is the genetic diversity. We know what happened with the potato famine, and just look at all our food today. How many pumpkin species did we have 30 years ago? How many Angus genetics did we have 30 years ago? Everything is just becoming narrower and narrower. And as we decrease these things, we know it leads to less resilience and instability. The other component of biodiversity, move that across there a bit, is mass and volume. More mass or the more volume of whatever it is means we're more biodiverse. So if you've got 1,000 blue whales as opposed to having 100, you are more biodiverse. There has to be all the living organisms that blue whales need to live. Again, we often ignore the fact of mass and volume. And finally, the concept of age. And again, driving between, where was that, Walker and Windermere last week. That's beautiful island grassland there, beautiful rolling hills with every single tree there is ancient. There isn't a young tree there at all. And they're all going to die in the next 10, 20, 30, maybe 40 years, I doubt it. And that whole environment's going to become less biodiverse. So, we often get hooked up on species diversity and rare and endangered species. But, you can tick the box and say, yeehaw, I've got koalas. But if they're all exactly the same genetic, they're all male, and they're all 40 years old, you're not stable. Your environment is not stable. I mean, the whole purpose of biodiversity is to create stability and resilience in landscapes. So the other little point I quickly wanted to show us before we ring off for the day, and soil surface is just such a key focus for biodiversity. And as we increase biodiversity, so here we've got high levels of biodiversity in its whole sense, where we're talking about age, we're talking about genetics, we're talking about mass and volume. We start off down here, we have few species, and things tend to be very unstable. As we add biodiversity across this line here, we start creating stability and resilience. This is where happy families live. This is where stable communities live. Over here, we've got crime, we've got all those things, as well as environmental instability. So when we look at it like that, and then we ask ourselves, what's happening to the leaf area of plants? As we increase species diversity, the leaf area, the chlorophyll activity, and ultimately energy increases as we get more species, which means more species can survive. As we increase biodiversity along that line, what's happening to our root depth and cycling of nutrients? Root depth and health, soil health, starts increasing. and how it connects to our effective water cycles, droughts and floods. Increase in that direction and they decrease in that direction. So this concept of biodiversity has a huge play out for everything. But when we look at the stability of things, over here, I always say, the environment, the weather, the moon phase, I don't know, whatever creates a good locust hatching. Okay, all those things might just tick the box over here, but over here we only have one bird that eats locusts. So the weather's right, the temperature's right, and we have these huge fluctuations of species. But as we get over to this point here, the conditions might be perfect, the temperature right, the moon phase right, because over here we might have 40 species of birds. We never have those big outbreaks and fluctuations. So like, is it a small wonder where you've got thousands and thousands of acres of wheat over the hill here that they have huge problems with mice? Because they've created an environment, very few species, okay? They've only got green leaf for probably, maximum of 100 days a year. The root depth of those plants is really shallow. And so all the other species are going to be prone to having these fluctuations and instability, including humans. And, it does have the effect on floods and droughts. So whatever we can do with our management, how can we move along this track? We need to be constantly moving towards more resilience, more biodiversity. And we do it through the use of tools, whether it's tractors, plows, harrows, management of livestock. So even down to, if you're mulching and slashing paddocks, if every third run you left half a meter unslashed, create that diversity of structure, you're actually moving yourself along this line to create more resilience for your property and yourself. Whereas, your neighbors will probably turn around and say, you're some sort of lunatic. How can you mow your paddock so badly? Couldn't you see you left all those strips? Simple way of creating more biodiversity for your paddock at the end of the day. And especially stuff, I always talk about spiders because, spiders are an apex predator and they need structure. Most of your spiders need structure to have nests, webs, sorry. And if you're just going in there with a mulcher and taking everything down flat, where do they go? Well, then come back. So I just like to grow that idea of biodiversity beyond what we do. We generally just focus on species diversity, and there's so much more to it, and how it links in with your water cycle, your mineral cycle, and how much energy your paddock's going to capture. And our job as farmers is to capture and package sunlight, whether we do it through livestock or cabbages.